Hi, my name is Sue Kitchen. I'm the Falls CNC at Sir Charles Gardner Osborne Park Healthcare Group. Here to talk to you today about our very small program, the Volunteers Falls Education Program. I'm going to just give an overview and then just talk about the results and our next steps, and then a little bit about what evidence is around for volunteers. These are just a few people who I need to acknowledge, who over the years have developed the Inpatient Falls Education Program at Osborne Park and continue it on to this day, and who have assisted with implementing the Volunteer Inpatient Education Program at Osborne Park. So the aim of the project was to identify if a trained volunteer could safely and effectively deliver individualised and basic information about falls and the risk of falling to patients that have been identified as a risk of falling in a secondary hospital setting. We know that this works in community. The Stay on Your Feet program of volunteers of peer education is proof of this. But we wondered if volunteers could actually deliver it as to our inpatients. And it would also complement the current inpatient education program that is delivered by the PTA at Osborne Park. So the booklet was developed many years ago based on the Safe Recovery program and was revised. There were several reviews and updates and multiple consumer reviews to get it to where it is at this point in time. The principles of Safe Recovery program were utilised: adult learning, individualised strategies and patient choice. So this is what the booklet looks like. The front page is titled Keeping Safe and Preventing Falls in Hospital, and the highlighted area is what we really want them to know. This is absolutely vital. And then on page 2, you can see there's a series of questions and areas where the patients can put their own information in. So this is very much along the adult learning style. So we wanted them, through conversation and through discussion, to identify their risks of falling and how they could reduce their risk of falling, and to develop their own plan in collaboration. We gave them a tick list of safe interventions as well to add into their thoughts and their ideas. They could choose which ones they wanted to utilize and which ones they didn't, and many adapted these as well, which I'll show you later. And then on the back page was information about what happens after a fall in hospital, but we also asked them to tick those 2 questions at the top: do not get up by yourself and call for help, just as an acknowledgement that they understood this was what we wanted them to do. So the volunteer training was based on the training for the Safe Recovery program. We did 4 hours, and it was a mix of online training, videos and face-to-face. This was completed over the COVID pandemic, so there were a lot of stop-starts to our program implementation, but we got there in the end. The themes within the training were around the latest evidence, falls risk factors and interventions, and using the booklet as a guide. The process from the initial referral from health professionals at Osborne Park through to how to conduct the interviews, how to liaise with the team, and what is to be documented. We talked about the learning styles of different patients and how to deliver the education. We talked about individualised care and problem solving. We also taught the teach back technique, which is recommended in the World Guidelines for Falls as the technique to use in patient education. And we went through the booklet in more detail and how to engage the patient and family on what information should be recorded by the patient and also by the volunteer. Referrals occurred in several ways. Allied Health would refer to the physiotherapy assistant, the PTA, and the PTA would then provide the volunteer with the details of the patients to be seen. There would also be verbal referrals by all staff when the volunteer was on the wards, so they would see Helen and they would mention patients who they felt were eligible for falls education. And you can see there there is our inclusion and exclusion criteria for referrals. So delivering the education was very much around adult learning. We got patient consent first to take part, and the volunteer gave consideration to the wellness of the patient, the environment, the fatigue levels, and sometimes would say, I'll come back to you later when you've had a rest or something like that. Conversation to encourage the patients to identify their own risks and mitigation strategies, which takes some time. It's not something that happens straight away. And patients, where possible, documented on the booklet, as you can see here in the picture. The volunteer then documents in the healthcare record that falls education has been provided and hands over to the PTA and the falls CNC. The URN was provided to enable follow-up of the patients where we were doing surveys, etc. Please note the volunteer was not allowed and is not allowed to offer any other clinical information or advice, and they refer the patient to their primary nurse of the day. If the volunteer did have any concerns, they were directed to inform the primary nurse, the shift coordinator, Allied Health, or the falls CNC. So we sought patient feedback on the volunteer visits, and I actually went to see all of the patients 1 to 3 days post-interview. The satisfaction survey was taken and there was a discussion with the patient about the interview and what the patient had learnt. The trial ran for 7 months. The volunteer attended for 1 day a week for 4 hours. All wards were visited. 85 patients were seen, which is an average of 3 per attendance and an average of 25 minutes per interview. What was found was there was a lot of time looking for notes or beginning to talk to the patient, and then they would a medical ward round would come in, or the patient was required to go for therapy, and so the volunteer would need to come back to finish that interview. "45 of the patients, or 53% of the patients, were followed up, and of those patients, 89% said that the talk or the discussion had helped them to understand their own risk of falling. Asked if the discussion had helped them to identify how to avoid or to reduce their risk of falling, 82% said yes. There were comments that included, would do if I didn't already know about it. It was interesting. I learned it was okay to call for a nurse, and I knew I was a falls risk anyway. It's interesting that the patients throughout the interviews that I conducted, majority of them said, I learned it was okay to call for a nurse. And this came up in the original Safe Recovery Program research. So this is something that we really need to emphasize to the patients. It's okay. That's what we're here for. It's okay to call for the nurse. Please do not hesitate. 87% were able to name an intervention without looking at the booklet. 85% found the booklet helpful, with the comments that included they would get the family to read it or the family was reading it, and they had a greater understanding of their loved one's falls risk. 60% were planning to show the booklet to their families and talk about falls. And one comment included, "Oh, this is important information for my hubby to know to help keep him safe at home too." So overall, the participants found that the discussion was useful, satisfactory and interesting. There were further comments, I know it, but it was good to be reassured that it was okay to call for the nurse. They're so busy, I hate calling for help and disturbing them. My daughter will be interested. Is it possible to involve them too? The volunteer knew her stuff. The volunteer told me about the trial and it's a good idea. We need to carry it on. Enjoy the chat. Nice to talk with an older person about this. I felt that the volunteer understood me. And I think sometimes peer-to-peer education is very, very important because an older person really does understand how another older person feels. And so I could understand that comment that was given to me by that patient. We looked at the booklet completion. So each booklet was photographed and sent in anonymously. There was no details collected. And we looked at the reasons that the patients considered their risk of falling, and these varied, and it was interesting to see it in their own language. Some were writing, "I'm not eating well, amputation, I'm weak, still think I'm younger than I am, meds, not very strong, not concentrating, I rush, I'm dizzy." This picture here showcased this because I thought this was very interesting. This was how a patient had chosen to write how they could reduce their risk of falling again, their plan. And you can see that it is in capitals and it is spaced out so that it is very, very clear for her to see and understand. The patient's plans were varied. They often were saying, think before doing, do exercises, check before stepping back, use the call bell, calm down, walk with someone. Page 3, you'll remember were the tick boxes, so the tick interventions that we provided for them. And the most popular ones here were to keep my belongings in reach and the using safe footwear, working on individual exercises and using the call bell. Patients did modify, as you can see by that picture there, patients modified them. So they put in comments such as walk as much as possible. They would cross out stay awake in the day and write, just can't do that, I need to have my naps or something like that. The walking aid would be changed to wheelchair and can't plan ahead when I've got diarrhea. We followed up as to how many patients that were interviewed had falls within 5 days of that interview. Now, falls are multifactorial, multi-interventional, and clearly one session of education is not going to stop falls, but it is going to reduce the risk. And 98% of the patients did not fall within 5 days of the interview. The volunteer was consistently included in the trial, providing feedback to the team, and They very much loved chatting with the patients and really felt that they were part of the team. The patients enjoyed the visit and the conversation, and for many, the volunteer really was their only visitor. The volunteer also enjoyed the opportunity to continue their own education in Falls and to have a connection with the healthcare system. This is what our volunteer said, and I think that it does really sum up the role of the volunteer in this program. Each patient is an individual that understands and learns in their own way, and I have the time to discover the best way to convey that message and allow the patient time to come up with, or help guide them to come up with, their own strategies. There were a few problems. We were only able to employ one volunteer due to the pandemic, which delayed and disrupted the program going into place. We only had a volunteer coordinator for a few months before the position was ceased. And very clearly, we need more volunteers to do a much larger project so that we can deliver more robust results. So the next steps are volunteers do need to have a health professional background. We have established that. We need to do some additions to the booklets, and we are including Falls education to patients with amputations. We want to employ more volunteers, and we want to change referrals to being noted on the journey board following the meetings, the morning meetings. This is because when we have many more volunteers, it's going to be much easier for them just to go to the ward, have a look at the journey board and find that information there and then carry on. So the final result is that the trial has been a success. A single volunteer with a clinical background can be trained to deliver effective Falls education to patients. And we've been learned from this trial, and it has driven improvement. Further study is required though. So what's the evidence around volunteers? There is a massive evidence around volunteers in all walks of life doing all different types of activities. So Stay on Your Feet Western Australia have trained volunteers that very effectively deliver education about falls to their peer groups in the community. There is also the Forget Me Not program at Royal Perth that works with patients who have a cognition impairment. That's another successful program. Volunteers who aid care with eating and drinking and mobilising in acute care have a positive effect on patient outcomes in relation to falls, nutrition and delirium. So volunteers don't actually need to deliver falls education, they just need to be there. Falls education delivered by volunteers in hospital settings has minimal evidence available, but within the community they are very effective. Volunteers also need support within their work, and a volunteer management team is very important. Falls education does need to be delivered with a very positive tone and coupled with those highly valued qualities of respect and empathy and time to listen, to be able to foster that motivation to engage in recommended activities. There are benefits to the volunteer, so it increases self-esteem and well-being, self-confidence and personal growth. It provides a purpose to life and a sense of achievement. Many bring and use their own skills and life experience with them. But you can learn new skills. It can help to relieve stress and symptoms of depression. It increases the physical and cognitive activity and allows the volunteer to act on values that are important to them. They also feel valued. They feel as if they're giving back to the community. And it provides a social interaction and can assist in combating loneliness. For others, The volunteer helps to alleviate loneliness, and it provides an outlet for conversation, both light and meaningful. They can improve the mood and lift depressive feelings of those that they visit. They motivate and they provide support. They teach, they listen, and they can reduce hospital-based loneliness. Being in a hospital as a patient can be very lonely. You are surrounded by people, and yet you are by yourself. So anybody who can come in and have a conversation, a decent conversation, really helps that patient. So looking at the cost benefits of volunteers, this information is from the USA, and really because I couldn't find anything that was based in Australia. But in America, organizations that use volunteers have a cost benefit. So for every $1 spent, they got $6 of value back from the volunteers. This study is worth a read. It's a small study, and it was training volunteers to lead mobility interventions. It really sets the tone for what we can do in a hospital environment, in a residential care environment, if we train volunteers to deliver a mobility intervention. So my take-homes are: trained volunteers can deliver falls education, and patients really connect with them, and peer-to-peer for many patients is extremely important. Volunteers themselves need the support and they need to feel part of the team. Lots of benefits for them and lots of patient benefits that we've outlined, and health system benefits too. The one thing that you do need is a volunteer coordinator for the onboarding with employment and any issues that may arise. Turnover can be rapid and frequent. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop me an email. Happy to provide any resources that I can.